Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today we're continuing our Sun Ce lore series with episode 3, titled When in Doubt, Go South. So last episode, we left off as Sun Ce finished up a grueling year-and-a-half campaign against Lu Kang at Lujiang, only to find out that Yuan Shu had once again went back on his word, as the position of the administrator in the newly captured commandery went over to Liu Xun, despite the fact that Yuan Shu had originally promised the position to Sun Ce, who actually did all the fighting. As this was not the first time Yuan Shu had gone back on his words, Sun Ce is not surprised, but is definitely completely disillusioned about his prospects of continuing to work under Yuan Shu's service. But finding a way out of Yuan Shu's service will not be so easily. Luckily, while Sun Ce was busy sieging Lu Kang in Lujiang, an interesting development occurred in the Yang province. Previously, we mentioned how Yuan Shu had grabbed power in the Yang province by killing Chen Wen, who was the previous prefect of the Yang province. But with Chen Wen's death, the imperial court wasted no time to find a replacement, and in 194, the imperial court had appointed Liu Yao to become the new prefect of the Yang province. But despite this imperial appointment, Liu Yao soon discovered the realities of the situation inside the Yang province. First off, Yuan Shu and his army sits firmly inside the capital of Shouchun. On paper, Yuan Shu is not technically resisting the imperial appointment, but he was definitely not planning to move out of Shouchun either. So without access to Shouchun, Liu Yao, with the help of Wu Jing and Sun Ben, who still viewed themselves as loyalists to the Han government, moved south to Que, where a temporary government was set up. While this wasn't an ideal situation for Liu Yao, for a period of time it did work, and at the very least he was able to govern some parts of the commanderies and muster up a force of his own. But Sun Ce's prolonged siege on Lujiang and the death of Lu Kang ended up being the straw that broke the camel's back, as Liu Yao is now certain that Yuan Shu is destined to rebel against the Han government. So in order to protect himself from that future, Liu Yao sent his two generals in Fan Neng and Zhang Ying to garrison troops along the northern banks of the Yangtze River at key crossings, as he led the rest of his force in a surprise attack against Wu Jing and Sun Ben, even though they had previously helped him set up the government here in Que, because Liu Yao was definitely not sure if he could trust them down the line given their allegiances to Yuan Shu. So after Liu Yao had successfully chased Wu Jing and Sun Ben north of the Yangtze River, the Yang province was now officially split in two, with Yuan Shu holding the northern half and Liu Yao holding the southern half. And for the next year, while Sun Ce was still sieging in Lujiang, Wu Jing and Sun Ben, under the command of Yuan Shu, would wage war on Liu Yao as they attempted to regain control of the land south of the Yangtze River. But after a series of back and forth battles between the two sides, it was pretty clear that neither side had the upper hand in the battle for the control of the Yangtze River crossing. In the meantime, Sun Ce's family was still in the south. But fortunately, with the help of an old family friend, Lady Wu and the rest of the family managed to escape Que soon after Liu Yao turned on Wu Jing and Sun Ben. And the old friend here turns out to be Zhu Zhi, who had served originally under Sun Jian since the Yellow Turban Rebellion. But unlike Huang Gai and Chen Pu, Zhu Zhi actually received a promotion after Sun Jian managed to chase Dong Zhuo out of Luoyang. So he was reassigned to the Xu province to help under Tao Qian to take down some of the remaining Yellow Turban remnants there. And because of this, when Sun Jian had died, Zhu Zhi did not end up being reabsorbed into Yuan Shu's forces, as he bounced around from one post to another until eventually he became a lieutenant back in the Wu commandery in the south. So when Liu Yao went to war against Yuan Shu, Zhu Zhi acted quickly and used his force to escort Lady Wu and the rest of the family out of Que back into the safety of the Wu commandery, which is Lady Wu's old home anyways. Then Zhu Zhi penned a letter to Sun Ce, offering him some advice. In this letter, Zhu Zhi explains how the south is ripe for the taking, given that the current conflict between Yuan Shu and Liu Yao, as well as the fractured state of the south, filled with weak administrators and filled with bandit factions. So when this letter finally reached Sun Ce was already planning to leave anyways, so the letter felt almost as a sign from above, and Sun Ce sprung into action as he approached Yuan Shu with a daring proposal. Sun Ce claims that given Liu Yao's transgressions in the south against his uncle and cousin, and is a big threat to Yuan Shu's ambitions, as Yuan Shu was currently tangling with Liu Bei and Lu Bu to the north in the Xu province, he could be the perfect candidate to head south in Yuan Shu's stead to resolve this issue. Sun Ce claims that he just needs a very small force to break Fan Neng and Zhang Ying's hold on the Yangtze River crossing. Afterward, once he crosses back into the south, there'll be plenty of new recruits, as there are many in the south who can still remember Sun Jian's deeds. So Sun Ce optimistically argues that he can recruit a force around 30,000 men after he goes south. Then, armed with this new force, he is sure that he can not only take down Liu Yao, but also the other Han-appointed administrators like Wang Lang and Xu Gong, as well as bandits like Zhu Lang and Yan Baihu. And once all this was done, and the south is secured, this seasoned force can return back north to help Yuan Shu extend his ambitions in every direction. Now, of course, Sun Ce had no intention of doing the last part, and Yuan Shu knew this as well. But after weighing the pros and cons of the situation, Yuan Shu decided that there was simply no way that Sun Ce could deliver on this grand plan, but there was also no harm in letting him give it a shot, as he needed someone to be fighting Liu Yao anyways, so why not Sun Ce? So in Yuan Shu's mind, Sun Ce's military track record so far included a failed attack on some bandits down south, a prolonged siege that lasted almost 2 years in Lujiang, so there was definitely a sense of overconfidence when Sun Ce basically promised the entire south half of the Yang province to him. But nevertheless, Yuan Shu did not want to waste one of his more trusted generals in the south, as he needed them to fight in the north, and Wu Jing and Sun Ben has also proved to be largely ineffective in the last year in trying to retake the Yangtze River crossing. So what harm can Sun Ce do? Conflicted, Yuan Shu ended up giving Sun Ce command of just 1,000 men and less than 100 horses, as he gave the blessing for Sun Ce to leave him to carry out his plan in the south. But Yuan Shu completely underestimated Sun Ce's abilities and, most importantly, his charm and charisma, for by the time Sun Ce had left camp with his 1,000 assigned men, a few hundred more voluntarily abandoned Yuan Shu to join his campaign instead. And by the time that Sun Ce had reached the northern banks of the Yangtze River to meet up with his uncle Wu Jing and his cousin Sun Ben, his force had already ballooned to over 6,000 men, with the support of veterans who had served under his father, like Huang Gai, Chen Pu, and Han Dang, as well as some youth from the region that were drawn to Sun Ce's charm, like Zhou Tai, Jiang Qin, and Chen Wu. And in addition to his own influx of men, Sun Ce got more help from the south. To the east of the battle lines of the Yangtze River, Zhu Zhi and his forces had arrived from Wu Commandery to lend a hand to Sun Ce, as they also brought Sun Ce's family back to reunite with him. And to the west, in Danyang, where Liu Yao currently runs his government as the prefect of the Yang province, there is also a local administrator of the commandery named Zhou Shang, who turns out to be Zhou Yu's uncle. And it also happens that a young Zhou Yu was currently visiting Zhou Shang around this time. So when news that his best friend Sun Ce was launching an attack at Hengjiang Crossing, Zhou Yu borrowed some troops from his uncle and led the force to flank Fan Neng from the southwest in order to help Sun Ce out. And sure enough, The ensuing battle for the Yangtze River was a cakewalk for Sun Ce's forces, as Fan Neng and Zhang Yin's army were beaten back from the Yangtze River, which allowed Sun Ce to finally cross back into the south. But taking the beachhead is only the first step, as now Sun Ce would have to face off against the forces of Zhuorong. Now, even though we have talked about Zhuorong a few times in the past, I still think his story is very interesting and worth sharing again for those of you who are hearing about him for the first time. Zhuorong was originally the chancellor of Xiapi, serving under Tao Qian. His job tasked him with collecting taxes and harvests from the entire Shu province. But instead of securing the collection into the treasury, he took the money and food and ran to Guangling, where he and his men tricked the local administrator into hosting them before murdering the administrator during the welcome feast. Then his men took over Guangling for a short period of time, where they looted the local treasuries. But strangely enough, Zhuorong was a huge believer of Buddhism, and he spared no expenses in building temples, hiring monks, and hosting festivals to spread Buddhism, which was a super new religion that had just got introduced to China from India. And in the grand scheme of things, Zhuorong's zealous promotion of Buddhism during this time period, where he spent trillions of dollars promoting the religion, had a lasting effect that can be even felt today in this southern region of China, where Buddhism still is a big hub today. But despite his faith in Buddhism, Zhuorong was a cruel man, as he gained his wealth and power through theft and murder. And due to these crimes, he was not going to be able to stay in Guangling for a long time, as he made his escape farther south to the Wu Commandery, where he joined up with Liu Yao. Now, with the lack of free-flowing information back in those days, Liu Yao had no idea of Zhuorong's wrongdoings, and just simply knows that he used to work for the government as the chancellor under Tao Qian, and like many of the other northern gentries, he was probably fleeing south to shelter from all the chaos and warfare that was consuming the country in the north. Thus, Zhuorong ended up working for Liu Yao, as he was now stationed here on the front lines against Sun Ce. But luckily, he was not alone, as Xue Li was also stationed near him. Now, Xue Li has a very similar background as Zhuorong, minus the theft and murder part. Xue Li was also a chancellor of Pengcheng, also under Tao Qian, but Xue Li and Tao Qian did not get along, so Xue Li resigned voluntarily and fled south, where he joined up with Liu Yao. So, with Sun Ce landing in the south, Zhuorong's army marched out to meet them at the crossing, but after a quick battle where Zhuorong lost over 500 men, he retreated his entire force back to their encampment to lick his wound. And fresh off their victory over Zhuorong, Sun Ce would march his force east now towards Xue Li's encampment, where victory was in sight, when reports that Fan Neng had managed to gather up some fresh troops and is now trying to retake the crossing while Sun Ce is trying to fight Xue Li. So Sun Ce quickly abandoned his fight against Xue Li to swing his army back west towards the crossing. At the crossing, a very chaotic battle ensued where Fan Neng was soundly defeated, as over 10,000 soldiers, civilians, including women and children, ended up being taken prisoner by Sun Ce. Then Sun Ce made the decision that he needed to take out Zhuorong's encampment first, as the enemy is going to be constantly threatening the crossing if he does not, and he just doesn't want to swing back and forth between different fights. So Sun Ce ordered his men to siege Zhuorong's encampment. But during the siege, a stray arrow would end up hitting Sun Ce in the leg, which would force him to retreat back to camp for medical attention. But the sight of him being rushed back to his tent with an arrow wound sparked the imagination of the 10,000 prisoners who are currently being held in Sun Ce's camp, and they took their chance to revolt, thinking that Sun Ce was gravely injured. And in the chaos that followed, it was not very dangerous for Sun Ce since none of the prisoners were armed, and Wu Jing ended up taking charge of the camp and regained control shortly after. However, the result of this prisoner revolt is that a few of the prisoners did manage to escape as they fled to Zhuorong's camp, informing him that Sun Ce had died to the arrow, which they genuinely believed. And clearly this information ended up tricking Zhuo Rong into organizing his men into a counterattack on Sun Ce's camp, which was a grave mistake, as Sun Ce and his men met them on the field. And given the outcome of the last open field battle, and add on the fact that they are now seeing this supposed dead person on his horse fighting them, Zhuo Rong's army routed, as thousands got slaughtered, and Zhuo Rong was forced to retreat back and barred the gates and hold his defensive position without ever thinking about coming out again. So with Xue Li and Zhuo Rong both beaten down and now turtling in their encampments, Sun Ce decided that now might be the best time to just bypass them entirely, as he continued to march his force to face off against Liu Yao. So to find out how those battles went and see if Sun Ce can continue his conquest of Wu, come back next time as we'll continue our Sun Ce lore series with episode 4, titled The Legacy of Wu. Once again, thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this episode and see you all next time. Bye!